Well, Citigroup has been hit with a $2 million fine and 2 analysts have lost their jobs. Let's get the very latest on this now with Joydeep Hor. Joydeep, thanks for joining us, first of all. This is an interesting one. The analysts were in clear breach of regulatory requirements and the restrictions involved or imposed by Citigroup on public communications. What should an employer do when they discover that this sort of conduct has occurred?
Yeah, so just by way of background, the employees here had been involved in some of the research work prior to the initial public offering for the Facebook listing earlier in the year. Someone obviously got very excited about the kind of work that they were doing, leaked some very confidential information to a blogger, and that's obviously in clear breach of numerous regulatory requirements, resulting in Citigroup as an employer and as a corporate entity paying a fairly significant fine as a result of that. On the employment side of things, naturally, this was not seen as acceptable conduct, clear breach of their policies, and they took steps to remove 2 of those individuals from their organisation. So, as to what employers should do, this you would like to think is not something that happens as a matter of regularity within organisations, but when these allegations do surface, what's critical from an employer point of view is that you've got to investigate it. You've got to conduct a thorough investigation. If necessary, you bring in people from outside your organisation to conduct that investigation. You would probably suspend those individuals almost immediately so that there can be no ongoing breaches by them and no accusation that you as an employer knew of the possibility but you didn't do anything about it. That investigation could take several weeks, several months. There are some organisations that are conducting similar investigations here in Australia at the moment, and depending on what the findings of that investigation are, obviously there could be some serious consequences for the individuals.
Does it always provide grounds for instant dismissal? What obligations and rights does an employer have in these kind of situations? Yeah,
typically it would depend on what the terms of their contract say. Confidential information is always and has always been seen as something that employers have the right to protect and take serious steps where there has been breaches of confidential information protection by staff or others. So it's going to be unusual that an employer won't be able to take quite severe action, but the critical question is going to be one of proof. And in jurisdictions like Australia, you do have access, or employees have access after dismissal, to claim that it was an unfair dismissal, and in the course of that kind of disputation or litigation they can say, well actually the breach was not so serious, and worse still, there was no breach, in which case the employer could be seriously embarrassed.
So to what extent can employers safeguard their confidential information then?
Yeah, I think they need to be very careful, particularly with the advent of social media, and I think it's been around now for several years. It just adds to the tapestry of the risk, I think, for employers, that the interconnectivity, if you like, between their employees and the world at large, the ease with which confidential information can be leaked, where it's not like it was 15, 20 years ago where you'd have to bundle up a dossier of documents and put them in a secret envelope and arrange for someone to take it somewhere. It's about clicking a button and you can divulge the most sensitive and mission-critical information for an organisation. And so what it really comes down to, I think, is that organisations need to have very tight IT infrastructure for starters, but also very clear policies and procedures that employees are inducted in relation to when they start. It makes it very clear that if you do breach our confidential information policies, etc., there could be serious consequences.
So what rights do employers have, though, in restricting some of the comments that their employees make in forums like social media?
Well, what we see a lot of employers doing here in Australia is having blanket, you can't comment about anything to do with this organisation, good, bad or otherwise. And I can see why a lot of employers would do that. A lot of employers say to me, but we do want our staff saying good things about us if they want to say to their friends that we're a great place to work and whatever else. But the better course of action, I think the safer course of action, is to be very strict in terms of those communications. It takes away a lot of that ambiguity. Because what you don't want to be in a situation of as an employer is an employee saying, oh, but I thought it would be okay because reasons X, Y and Z. And you want to take that ambiguity away, or to have that argument at that particular point in time. So everyone should be clear about what the employer's stance is, and if they want to take a view of, well, anything goes, then so be it, but naturally there's going to be some consequences for them.
Yeah, absolutely. How should employers go about controlling this kind of misuse? What are some tips for them?
I think they need to, apart from the inductions and apart from having the policies, I think it's also the identification, firstly, of what is confidential information as opposed to what might be seen to be in the public domain. And particularly with analysts and the kinds of employees that were involved here, there is a lot of grey in that. But the actual protection of confidential information rests with what information do you actually expose what levels of employees to within your organisation? I mean, are you going to have a very generous approach to sharing that information, or is it going to be limited purely to those people who actually need it for their day-to-day business and employment duties? If you get that judgment call right, you can probably protect your confidential information a lot better than when you're in recovery mode after there's been wide dissemination of it.
Joydeep Hor, Managing Principal of People Culture Strategies, thank you so much for joining us on First Business.
Pleasure.
We do have to take a quick break.